Afternoon, everybody. Welcome back again. We're still at the CZI Annual Conference, and we've got a good friend of the show, Mucha. And you're the president. The last time we spoke, I think you were vice president. It was about, 3 years ago?
It was 3 years ago.
So you're going up in the world, eh?
It doesn't feel like that because I think it was a lot easier as vice president.
Yeah.
Because as president, there's a lot more.
Okay, so let's
shoulders.
let's actually talk about that because it's a different ball game from what we saw 3 years ago, and the institution is certainly growing.
Yeah.
Is that your strategy? What have you been doing to ensure that the institution is actually strong?
Yeah. So, we've been very lucky with the CEO that we've got, CZI.
Mm-hmm.
When we got in, the institution was underfunded. Our members weren't really paying, and that's a sign of their belief. So we had to really introspect over the last couple of years and say, are we still relevant? Today, are we going to be relevant going forward? What does a CZI member look like, right?
Mm-hmm.
Today? What does a CZI member look like in 5 years' time? And we need to get them when they're young. Not only that, but we also have to keep the old guys happy that this organization is relevant. So in order for us to do that, we understood we needed resources. We've been able to raise quite a lot of funding from members, so members are paying better. We've got a lot of accountants here. They're not paying at the rate we would want. But we've been able to get a lot of funding. And now we employ about 30 people. When I was vice president, we only had 2 technical members of staff. Today, we've got about 20.
Oh, impressive.
Economists, number crunchers, folks who are really able to add value. So as we've had the infrastructure, in terms of our infrastructure is our human capital. Mm-hmm. As it's grown, we can actually give a lot more to our members.
Okay.
And I think we've had feedback from our members that...
Could you speak to that output? So you've explained the input, and what's been the output? What output? What tangible output do you have out there for members to actually say, "Oh, yeah, that's what CZI has been doing"?
Okay, so our ambitions haven't changed. Our ambitions have always been value chains, development of value chains, interface with government in terms of macroeconomic stability, and having our voice be heard in that conversation. We also have to add value to the processes that government is trying to do. So government is doing the industrialization plan. Right now we're in the thick of ease of doing business and the costs, regulatory bodies, etc. Mm-hmm. And I think we've had a great relationship with government because we've actually been working with them. And this is in the President's office, in the Ministry of Industry, and the Ministry of Finance. Those are the key ministries for us.
Okay. Could you walk through what that engagement looks like? Yeah. Is it one where you're just sitting across the table, or it's interactive? Yeah. What does it look like? Give us a bit of color.
It varies depending on the personality of who we're engaging. And I'm not talking about an individual personality, the corporate personality, right? And also, it depends on how mature our relationship has been with that organization. So if you look at the Reserve Bank, we've got a quarterly meeting with the Reserve Bank with an agenda. It's a very mature meeting. We've been having it for 15 plus years. We write our positions. We're quite forthright. In fact, we've been in trouble once or twice. But we believe we're constructive, right? And in fact, our positioning as CZI is robust but constructive. And that's a positioning that we have always cherished. So we don't want...
Okay. And your feedback from your members, are they seeing the changes with the value chains and with policy advocacy that you guys are doing?
I hope the answer is yes. I've been getting good feedback. So, I was going to finish on the last point. So, one of the things that we've done in terms of value chains is we've also gone back to what is CZI, and what we want to be is a federation. So there's the whole conversation. What's the difference between CZI, ZNCC, et cetera, et cetera? Right? We've really had to ask that question. Historically, you found that the federation was a federation. So you've got millers, their body coming in. You've got,
manufacturers,
tobacco, manufacture. But within manufacturing, you've got different kinds of manufacturers, right? So you'll find there's a lot of bodies out there, right? And CZI, historically, we had turned 100 years. That's why we've had to think about this. Was we'd bring the federations together and we'd support the federations. So we've got some federations or business organizations that aren't big enough to have a secretariat. So we've started to offer them secretarial services, offices. So we've gone back to pulling everyone together, number one, and understanding what they're doing. And I think we've done a lot of progress on that. We've also sort of tried to ask ourselves, what is the difference, if you go to the first world, between the federation and the chambers, right? And what you find, for example, in the UK, the London Chamber is bigger than the federation. And you find that the chambers tend to look at local issues. So how is the water? Are the roads working?
Okay, all right. Electricity,
up and running. Are
the rates,
traffic lights,
okay,
the rates, the services, is the garbage being cleared, or the rats multiplying? So we had kind of conflated. We were trying to go back to what we actually are about, and hopefully that journey will pay dividends.
Are you seeing the differences?
Yeah, for sure. I think certainly over the last several years, your profile is much higher. We hear a lot more about what you're doing, about the positions that you're lobbying for. In fact, we were discussing it on the show a couple of weeks ago that it actually was a talking point for us. The issues that you raised, and frankly, several years ago, our biggest gripe about the business community was that it was too quiet. It was not engaged in the conversations about the policy actions that matter in the market. And that's not true anymore. I think you guys have stepped up to the plate, and you raise important issues timelessly when something happens, whether it's a policy action that's not working or a policy action that we need to see more of, or that needs to be executed more aggressively. We certainly aren't guessing anymore. Where does CZI stand? What's the thinking? And also what we're seeing is the engagement with the policymakers is much better. So, at your conference, you've got a bunch of policymakers coming through. We see the engagements. And I think the discourse as well is much more amiable than it's been, historically. Historically, usually from the policymakers' standpoint, they are basically pontificating and moralizing about how we in the private sector are busy profiteering and exploiting labor and, getting up to all sorts of bad behavior. And in response, we're saying, well, you guys aren't doing such a great job either. But I think we're at a place where, they don't think we're villains. And we our understanding of where they're coming from, what they're trying to do is more charitable. We don't think that, So I think we've made progress. And it's cause for optimism from my perspective.
So, well, thanks for that. That's very useful feedback. And I think it also speaks to the fact that we're a bigger team, so we can get to more places, number one. Number two, we have really, what does robust but constructive mean? You've got to, because, if you just make noise, pontificate, to use your word, right? And you don't get any changes, are you effective? Right? So you can make as much noise. It's actually better, I think, to be quieter, but not so quiet that your membership doesn't know what you're doing, and to get results. So for us, that's excellent feedback for us, and we'll carry on that path as best as we can.
All right. So, let's actually get to some of the more problematic areas. which is the informal sector. So when you look at who you're representing the formal businesses. But we could argue that right now there's a war that's going on between formal businesses and the informal sector. So not necessarily government. Government swings. Sometimes they are supporting the formal businesses, and sometimes they're supporting the informal sector business. What's your perspective, and how do you see the economy or this relationship, this antagonism or paradox between informal and formal going forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think we have to distinguish between small organizations that are registered, that are paying taxes, etc., and organizations that are outside of the system, right? Mm-hmm. And our position is really about the guys who are outside of the system. So someone might look at someone selling vegetables in Bare as informal, but if they're registered under the council and they're paying whatever it is that they have to pay daily or weekly, we see a role for them, right? The informal business, I've got two minds. So there's the regulatory side, right? How do we, because I always find a lot of these things are systemic. So what are the laws that are promoting that informality? And number one. Number two, what can we do as the formal business to bring that business into the formal business? Simple example is cows. We're on record as saying that we feel that the 15% VAT on the sale of beef should be removed. And that's because we want my gogo, your gogo, etc., in the village to be able to sell her cow to an organization that's part of the formal system, right? So I don't think we can get rid of the informal sector, but we can incorporate them somehow. So let's look at the policies that do that. Where we feel the friction is where there's things like smuggling going on, fake goods. We're having to carry the entire tax burden. So we pay the burden, we pay the tax, and they benefit from that. It's not fair. And then it becomes snowballing. So it encourages more informalization. So you end up shrinking the guys who are carrying that group of individuals. So unfortunately, what that also does is that we end up with bad taxes, like IMTT, right? So IMTT is a response to informalization, right? If you look at some of our fuel taxes, one of the reasons, and we're not the only country in the world, but we need it more than, say, the UK. The fuel tax in Zim is very high because of the level of informalization. So as the minister, you're saying, okay, look, everybody is going to get into a combi, right? Everybody might transact at some point on EcoCash on the bank account, so I'm going to tax those guys. So you end up actually with bad taxes.
And punishing the good guys.
That's right.
And in fact, making the formal guys become informal.
That's right.
Or the big businesses becoming informal. That's another big challenge. How are you addressing it with your members? Because there are numerous business people that I've come across who are big business, who are doing, large amounts of turnover, who've said, well, I think we're better off just informalizing. So we're still a formal business, but as far as transactions are concerned and everything, it has now become informalized because the policy environment and the transacting environment is just not conducive.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what I can add to that because you're spot on. So that's exactly what happens, right? So the temptation for organizations to get into that, there's too many incentives to be informal. The bigger the informal sector is, I think it's a flag on how we need to improve our ease of doing business and our regulatory environment.
Okay.
And I think it's reversible. And why I say this, if you recall 2008, I would say 95% we're a 95% informal market in 2008. By the time we got to 2010, in 1 year, we were back, right? So hyperinflation, etc. It was just so hard to comply. So if we get the right environment, we can actually formalize this market. And again, that's one of the things that we need to remember. We are not against small businesses. That's not where our fight is. Our fight is because there's another risk, by the way. When you allow a big informal market worldwide, we've seen that a lot of things start to happen. So initially, they will import a product without paying duties. Then you see illegal products getting manufactured, packaged. So they start to commingle fake goods with authentic goods. Then eventually you just got fake goods coming in. And this is a phenomenon that we've seen worldwide.
So we've seen the state make progress in terms of ease of doing business. I get the sense that there is some sort of understanding of the problem. You know, that we've just got too many rules and regulations, and, you know, these fees and penalties and commissions are too high, and the informal sector has therefore taken market share from the formal sector. But, you know, what I think is missing is just aggression, right? So I think conceptually, the idea that we need to have more ease of doing business is fantastic. But in terms of execution on the ground of actual reforms, you know, we think it's really slow. We need to see much more aggression. Otherwise, you're not going to see the formal sector retake market share from the informal sector. And what I would say the biggest albatross is for the formal sector in Zim is exchange control. And, you know, because, you know, a market with credit, right? If the informal sector would not be able to compete if the formal sector had access to cheap credit and the capital came into the market, and they were able to trade economies of scale, you know, you wouldn't be able to compete if you're in the informal sector. So you mentioned something that piqued my interest about your 15-year engagement with the Reserve Bank. And how mature it is. What sense do you get from that in terms of are we going to move the needle in a meaningful way in terms of exchange control and getting the credit in the banking sector working the way it's supposed to?
That's why I enjoy coming here. These questions. So you know what? It's not. You've actually touched on quite a lot of issues. So in terms of exchange control, we are a dollar economy. We have an ambition to de-dollarize in 2030. Right? That's our ambition. We have a reserve bank that at the moment is not printing any money, right? But the challenge has moved to a situation where now we have a Ministry of Finance that's grappling with balancing the books. So the current challenge has moved out of the Reserve Bank into the Ministry of Finance, right? Before the Ministry of Finance, it didn't really matter. So the Reserve Bank printing of money, which caused a lot of the exchange control issues, was a response to printing, right? Now they're not printing, but we haven't necessarily come to grips with what's going on in the Ministry of Finance. So where we land on exchange control, I believe, is where we land on Ministry of Finance's ability to have the nation live within its own books. Part within its, eating what they kill, right? So I think the flag to see where we're going to land with exchange control is what we see happening at Ministry of Finance. If Minister of Finance is not able to rein in all the spending, etc., one of the issues that we had about the regulatory bodies, all the spending used to come to Parliament, right?
Yes.
As regulatory bodies emerged, some of the spending escaped Parliament, right? It was insidious. I don't think anyone planned. It just happened, and we ended up in a bad place. And I think the Minister of Finance has realized that. So that's why I think we're actually going to win on the regulatory, because people have realized that taxes actually have moved out. Now, in terms of credit, credit is, I think, is a bigger question. It's about capital. And are people willing to avail their capital into the banks first, right? Not just Zimbabweans, but the international community. Avail capital into an economy, and then allow credit to be created. The statutory reserves are 30% on dollars and on USD, right? The governor has stated what his issues are. For him to move statutory reserves down, he's got certain things he needs to see in the economy. So we're not going to be able to see credit growing until we see other things that long-term trust in banking re-emerge. Wow, I'm going to stop there. I hope I've kind of answered your question, because you're right. Credit will help.
Mataura pachikuru. That's good enough. That's good enough. The producers are telling us it's already time up. But yeah. But this was interesting and always very thoughtful. And I think we've heard you. Okay. And those with ears have heard what you have to say. And we hope that, next year and the next 5 years, again, the CZI as an institution continues to grow. I think it's in the best interest of everybody that it actually grows, and its advocacy work and its value chain work grows, and we actually become a more formalized economy. To everybody watching, thank you very much, and we're still here at CZI Annual Conference, and thanks to BAT, Cafelos, Old Mutual, and Delta Beverages. Cheers.
Cheers.